Hey, welcome everyone. Great to have you here. I hope you can have some fun. Time is in limited supply, so as soon as my screen is connected to the right slide, I will introduce you to the wonderful world of how to optimize Magento for Varnish, or Varnish for Magento, whichever way you look at it. Now, if you would have asked me like a month ago, are you coming to Florida, or three months ago, are you coming to Florida? I would have no idea. But I have this opportunity. I submitted a talk, and here we are. So I'm European, by the way. I come from Belgium. It's a lot nicer weather out here than back home, where it's freezing. So it's an absolute treat to have you here with me. Now, before I can start, I need to make sure we're on the same page. I have this central sort of slide that I always use in my presentations to see. It's a bit of a crowd participation thing, but it's also a core message. So here we go. There we go. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, do we agree that slow websites suck? Is that something we can agree on? Is that something we can relate to? If the answer would be no, that'd be a big problem to me because, I mean, my world revolves around performance and making slow stuff faster. So, that being said, I'd first like to introduce myself. My name is Thijs. Yes, that's how you pronounce that. I'm quite used to justifying that. I'm a Dutch-speaking Belgian, and I hold the title of the Tech Evangelist at Varnish Software. I know, quite a lot. I have some explaining to do every now and then. There's no relation to religion or anything, but I do a lot of outreach. I do a lot of presentations. I create a lot of video content, a lot of tutorials, but I also write books. So here's my first one, Getting Started with Varnish Cache, wrote with O'Reilly. Tremendous honor to be an O'Reilly author. But as you can see by my facial expression, not too excited anymore. It's an old book. Luckily, I've gotten a new one, Varnish 6 by example. I have a free copy. I will put that here on stage. And the way this is going to work is when I walk off stage, someone is either going to grab that book or it's going to stay there throughout the event. That's how we're going to do that. It's a 778 pager. Most of the stuff I'm going to talk about, not everything, because the technology constantly evolving, is in there. So it's a free read. Come check it out. And we have a spare one at the booth. So I work for Varnish Software. By show of hands, who's heard of Varnish Software before? This is fun. This is fun. Most events I attend, I have to justify who we are and explain what we do. But thanks to Magento, who considered us the recommended page cache, I don't have to do all this intro again. What I can say is we build software-defined web acceleration and content delivery solutions. That's what we do. It's just software. You can install wherever you want. You can run it on your own servers or with a hosting company. You can run us in the cloud. We have official machine images in the marketplaces of Amazon, Google, Azure, and the likes. You know how that works. You can orchestrate us in a Kubernetes setup. You can use containers and all that stuff. However, here's the thing I have to admit. Most of us know us as the company behind the open source project. And I realize that, and I admit that. And the open source project is used by, I'd say, millions of active websites. And tens of thousands, I would say, Magento websites. So we are the company behind it. We facilitate it. We sponsor the project. But we leave it alone. It's independent. I mean, as a commercial entity, it's only normal that we have no say in the project. It evolves. We support it. That's how open source works and should work. Now, if you use Magento, and this audience will be no stranger to that, you have a direct interaction pattern without the caching between the user and your Magento setup. Great. However, you'll be no stranger to that either, is that it's not that hard to put Magento under pressure. Am I right? Can we relate to that? It doesn't take that many users to put a little bit of stress on the system. Also, depending on the type of workloads you're doing, how many products you have, it tends to get tricky. So the way we try to solve this is by adding us as a sort of reverse caching proxy, at least in that role, in front of Magento, to shield Magento from the pressure of the visitors. You probably know how that works, right? So that's a quality of service kind of play. But also, because we store these objects in the cache and deliver them at really high speed to the requesting users, we're also improving the quality of experience, which is key, right? Like in this world where we aim to get conversions as quickly as possible, even the minor or the slightest of delays, people get frustrated and go elsewhere because it's a very competitive market. So that's how we operate. Now, we didn't invent all the protocols on our own. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We actually leverage what is there. And what is there is HTTP. And HTTP has built-in caching mechanisms. Magento will emit the headers that you see here to Varnish. It will say, if you look at the top line, cache control public max H 86,400. Anyone have an idea how long 86,400 seconds is? Cool. Did you just calculate that, or was that cached? Yeah, cache. Pun intended, pun intended. But also, there are pages in Magento that cannot be cached because they're hyper-personalized. Thinking about the admin panel, maybe even the checkout procedure. And Magento will omit the bottom header. Just throw the kitchen sink at it, right? No store, no cache, must revalidate, max age 0, just to be sure that it doesn't end up in the cache. However, while this is very conventional and get you a long way, it is not enough. Magento is so specific, and every framework is very specific, that it requires a level of personalization on the cache that goes beyond what is available and what is possible in HTTP. And that's where, who's heard of Varnish configuration language, VCL? Still, very nice. Even my colleagues have heard of VCL, which is very reassuring. It's very reassuring. So it is a domain-specific programming language, not a top-down programming language. You actually hook into this, into what we call the finite state machine. Is it a fair assumption to say that anyone in this room can read a flowchart? Is that too much to ask? No? No, that's good, right? So what this language does is it hooks into all these stages. Every box you see is a state in the execution flow, and we can extend that through our VCL code. Every part of this already has a standard behavior that is very tightly knit with best practices in the world of HTTP and the world of caching. But of course, Magento has specific requirements, and then we need to write VCL. I don't have enough time in this session to go through all the VCL. I can say that I recognize that it's sometimes challenging for people, and I just took a couple of extracts to show what we can do. Now, one of the things that we aim to do is improve the hit rate of the cache. So if I take you back to the previous slide and take you to one of the flows, so let's start on the left upper hand corner at the start. You go into VCL rec v, which is short for receive, so you receive a request from a user to your Magento system. If we deem it cacheable, which is important, we deem it cacheable, we will create a lookup hash, or look it up in the cache. How do we do the lookup? Well, you need a unique identifier, which is the URL and the host header. So what we do in this code, or the majority of the code, is to optimize that code to improve the hit rate. Like, for example, if you have a URL that ends with a question mark, shouldn't be the case, right? You were intending to use query string parameters, but in reality you didn't. Well, while the output's still the same, it's a different cache key. Cache miss, avoid that, trim it off. Same with the host header. If you go to the URL and add the port explicitly to your URL, it's a different string. Cache miss, try to avoid that. So we strip off the port. This comes directly from the official Magento template, right? This is not something we invented. Also, ordering the query string parameters, the third part. If you would be clever enough to reorder the query string params, it's the same output, but it's a different cache key, and you have a cache miss. And then, of course, you need to trim off some headers, which are a bit tricky in terms of security, and so on and so forth. Even at the backend side, so if you go into VCL backend response, which is the execution part, maybe let me take you here. So VCL backend response lives in that gray box. So that means interaction with Magento. It either means a cache miss, an expired object, or something that could never be stored in the cache. Well, when you hit that one, here's an extract. We set grace for 3 days, for example. What is grace? This allows you, if you read the comments, you'd see, to be able to even serve stale content. Even though the object is expired, we'll still serve it while we do an asynchronous revalidation. How long can we do it? For 3 days. 3 days past the expiration of the object, we will serve the old object, which will take away a lot of pressure. Also, Magento, and I don't like that about Magento, is throwing around set cookie headers like it's Christmas. It's just like all over the place. I do not like that because setting a cookie implies explicitly that you do a state change, which is not cacheable by default. So the Magento community and also the Varnish community came up with this line of code that says, if we think the object is cacheable because the time to live is greater than 0, and the request method doesn't imply state changes, which are typical for post, put, patch, delete, all that kind of stuff, but that's not the case, it's a get or a head, we're confident that the set cookie header, either for the PHP session or the form key, doesn't add value, so we'll trim it off. So that's all standard, that happens in there. And it's part of a lot more VCL code that I don't have time to talk about. What I can talk about is, in a lot of cases, all of that complexity is offloaded for you because the Magento admin panel allows you to trigger all these things to happen and to parameterize certain settings. And the output, if you press the export VCL button, all these parameters will come out of it. And you can set the time to live and who is allowed to invalidate the cache and where Magento lives, all these settings that you need to spit out, so to speak, this VCL file. Here's a controversial take from my end. I don't recommend that you do that. The reason I don't recommend it is I can't vouch for the quality of the VCL file. I've looked at the VCL file. It's not great. It's okay, but it's not great. So please don't do that for now. I'm trying to improve that. I don't have time to figure out all or show you. There's a ton of things I can show you that don't make sense. I'll highlight one of them, is the invalidation. For some reason, the X-pool header is thrown into the mix. I asked, you all know Ivan Chapurny, probably, one of the figureheads in the community. He told me it's related to Capistrano deployments, has no relation to Magento. What is it doing there messing with our VCL? Also, a missed opportunity. If Magento doesn't set the X Magento tags pattern header, which it does to invalidate the cache or the pool, it'll give you an error. I would provide a soft landing, and I'll show you that. So, and there's other things that I say, we could have done that better. But here's the good news. We're trying to do that better. We're not complaining. So this guy is called Peter Jaap Blaakmeer. The fact that I just pronounced that with that accent, you can hear I'm European, I'm a Dutch-speaking Belgian. He's Dutch. And I met them at the first post-COVID conference. In my case, that was LaraCon in Amsterdam, the Laravel PHP conference, which was spectacular. Yes, the event was good, but everyone came out of their little lockdown for the first time ever, and the vibe was crazy. There's still footage of me online. If you go to LaraCon on YouTube and type my name, you'll find the footage. So I was on a high. I was walking off stage like, wow, this was incredible. And Peter Jaap approaches me and said, you know what, Thijs, I see you're heavily involved in Varnish. How would you feel about making the standard template for Magento better? And I said, great. And we started doing that in an attempt to get a pull request approved by the Magento main repo. That proved to be very frustrating. We haven't reached that point yet. But we still have those ambitions. In the meantime, there is this gist out there by Peter Jaap that a bunch of us are working on to make it better. And that would be the source for whatever pull request we come up with. And it's a living thing. People contribute like, could you do this, could you do that? And if it's sensible, we'll change it. Like one example is all the marketing parameters, which are very relevant in e-commerce, like these campaign codes that get added to the URL. We provide a pretty complete list of things that we need to strip off to improve the hit rate, among other things. And what I've done as well, as the maintainer of the official Varnish developer portal, is I backport that code every now and then to ensure that whoever Googles Varnish Magento gets the good stuff. This is as official as it gets. And the cool thing about this page is it has very high SEO value. So people typing Varnish Magento, this will probably be in the top 5 or top 10. So this is a good start. But still the ambition is, and I need to talk to you Adobe folks, to get a good pull request approved so everyone can benefit from it. But however, there are obstacles and limitations too. I mean, there's no way around it. While we are one of the main benefactors and the stewards behind the open source project, we have no absolute say. So whoever leads the project decides what happens. And I noticed, many people have noticed, there is no TLS in Varnish natively. We've been having it for years. There's also no dynamic backends. Cache invalidation in Magento is a bit tricky. I'll show you that. There's no soft purchase. There's no automatic memory management. And I get it, VCL is tough to grasp sometimes. So what we've done is, as an entity, we've come up with potential solutions and a couple of extra features that I'd like to talk about. It is part of a new product that we would like to launch that is not targeted at enterprise organizations. We'd like to keep it low touch, not make it expensive, and try to contribute these features that are typically part of an enterprise offering and make it as a very tangible product. I'm not going to talk about the details of product and commercial stuff. That's not appreciated in these talks, I know this. But just know that we're trying to bridge that gap between open source at the lower end and at the top end, the enterprise stuff. And we might redefine what open source means and do other contributions that are free and readily available. We're in that process. So talk to us at the stand. You'll see guys like Christian, who's sitting at the front here, and myself. We have a stand in the corner at the exhibition hall. Meet us there. What I'm going to show you is a couple of features, like native TLS, which is great because now you need an extra TLS proxy or a load balancer, just that extra system to offload TLS. We can do that natively at the client side, but also at the backend side. Let me show you how that's done. Varnish D, the runtime process, either you have that in your systemd file, or if you're running a Docker image, that will be the startup command. Typically, you'll do -a:80 to listen for incoming plain HTTP traffic because of the lack of HTTP as an open source. You can now register an extra port and annotate it with HTTPS. This will let us know, like, hey, this person is trying to do native TLS, so let's give him the certificates. And there's extra admin commands to load certificates, to discard them, You can also do dynamic reloads of certificates that have expired without restarting the cache and emptying it, all that kind of stuff. So from an operational perspective, what you would do is you would throw these commands in a configuration file, like you see here, close the socket, start the worker process, load the certificate, commit it, and that file you can dynamically link using, as you can see on the slide marked in red, with the -i uppercase runtime parameter. So that ensures as soon as Varnish starts, the certificates will be loaded and you'll be good to go. That's the client side aspect of it. There's also the backend side where Varnish communicates with Magento over TLS. So what we've introduced is some extra syntactic sugar in VCL with just SSL equals 1. And then we know we get the certificate from the backend. You can change the port to 443 and have end-to-end TLS. It's a nice feature. It's okay, but there's more exciting stuff on the horizon. Like the memory governor. A feature is so nice in terms of name, I had to create this ridiculous image in Illustrator and Photoshop. I think the name pretty much covers it, right? Memory governor, govern the memory. And it's all based on this misconception of how memory is calculated and used in Varnish. So what the memory governor does is it manages the memory and reduces the memory footprint of the complete Varnish process compared to just sizing the cache. So a lot of people think, oh, malloc 8 gigabytes, Varnish will consume 8 gigabytes of memory. No, Varnish will offer you 8 gigabytes of storage. But whatever memory is required to handle all these incoming requests is on top of that. And you wouldn't be the first one to go out of memory. So by switching this up to MSC, which is short for Massive Storage Engine, you will have memory governor. And we will dynamically resize the cache to ensure you have a constant memory footprint. So let's say you have this, you have 90 gigs in your, or 100 gigs in the server and 10 gigs headroom. 89 gigabytes will be used for the cache. Maybe you have a lot of objects in the cache, so that's 500 megs for object accounting, if you will. These are all just random numbers, right? And 500 megabytes just to handle all the incoming requests, all the handling of the VCL. Maybe you have thousands of requests, but then you hit tens of thousands of requests. And what we do, we know that the other parts will consume more memory, we'll dynamically resize the cache temporarily. And that's just done by switching from malloc to MSC. And if you don't specify a memory target, we'll take 80% of your server's memory and use that to be on our way. But of course, you can reconfigure that using the -p memory underscore target parameter, set it to 80%, set it to 50 gigabytes and be done with it. Also a nice feature. Let me bring you the killer feature, or the thing that I know people need. Who here sometimes struggles with cache invalidation in Magento? A bunch of you. It's common, I know this. And there is this notion of tag-based cache invalidation. This is the standard implementation you get out of Magento. So it's all relying on the ban function. And the ban functionality is just a way of doing expressions that you match against cached objects and that you can match with a regular expression. And because open source doesn't have native tag-based cache invalidation, Magento is aware of that and circumvents it in a bit by offering regular expressions to match that. So here's how that goes. Here's an extract from our logs. So here is a page coming in with a 200 OK. You already see the set cookies that we didn't ask for, but that happened nonetheless. We'll trim them off later. But the one that really matters is X Magento tags. That is a header that is set by Magento implying what cache tags should be registered. We will register that as a header. As you can see, the TTL is also set. So what we will then do is by taking that header and storing it, Magento, when something changes to one of those tags, will issue a purge call, which is a custom request method specifically used for cache invalidation, comparable to get and post and all the others. And it will provide that X Magento tags pattern. And because Magento knows that the open source version doesn't have native tags, it will start adding regex kind of syntax to it to match that string. So if you look at the top line, let's say we want to invalidate cat C8. We don't really know, is it at the beginning of the string, at the end, hence the regular expression logic. If you want to flush the cache, because you have that button also in Magento, it will issue a dot asterisk, which will match every single object in the cache. So what happens when that gets executed, remember, it's this ban function that gets called. The ban function will add the expression that is parsed in onto the ban list. So if you do Varnish ADM ban list, you'll see all the bans that are currently being executed. And that's part of the problem, because regular expressions require a little bit of compute power, and every ban needs to be matched to every single object in the cache. So if you have 1 million objects and maybe 100 bans, that's a permutation you have to do, and that will get slow. So the way we try to do that, and there's also an X-key module, which we'll see if we could try to make that better, but we've built a more performant version of it called Y-key. And what it does is it replaces, and by the way, I have to admit, all this code, this part, I borrowed, let me get you back here, I borrowed from Ivan Ciperni. He made that, and he says that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I agree with that, so all credits to Ivan, where he actually built his code to trim off all the regular expression mumbo-jumbo, which I will show you later on. Or is it phony baloney? I'm not sure what the term is. And we will then do a pure tag-based cache invalidation with true as the last parameter to have soft purging. Let me get you to that stage as well. And in the end, we'll just return how many objects we invalidated. So what does that look like in real life? Again, a log extract. We do a purge. The Magento tags pattern header wants to invalidate cat P. Am I still there? Yes? Check, check. Cat P1, cat C2, cat C3, some other stuff. And we add all the regular expression logic to be able to match that. But since we have our Y-key native tag-based cache invalidation module, you'll see throughout that we're trimming off all the extras. Up until the end, the last instance of X-key purge just has the categories with spaces, and then we index them. You see the Y-key tags, this is native tag-based cache invalidation. We mark them, we treat them as first-class citizens, and in the end, 3 objects were affected. Great. How do we register them? Well, in VCL backend response, we can look at the header, provide the separator, and again some logs, we will index them as pure tags, which will be a lot more efficient. However, here's the kicker. By setting soft purging to true, you take away a lot of pressure from Magento. If you would ask me what the main thing is I wanted to tell you, this is it. So what is soft purging? Well, you know what regular and hard purging is. As soon as Magento matches all the tags, it will just throw away all those items from the cache. And if a category tag is affected, has a ton of products linked to it, all these products are removed from the cache. If you have a busy website, you can imagine what's going to happen. You'll have a lot of traffic hitting those Magento backends, which would cause all kinds of problems. Could be quality of service, but it's primarily quality of experience. People have to wait until Magento returns that. So by doing soft purging, we use the following mechanism. So it requires a little bit of extra here. The total lifetime of an object in the cache is the sum of the TTL, the grace period, which I featured in the beginning, and keep. Keep is irrelevant for this, but for the sake of completeness, let me show you that. So the TTL is, if you paid close attention, what's the standard TTL here? A day, and indeed, 86,400 seconds. That is a moving target. Eventually that will hit 0, or could go below 0. But if the grace time is, the sum of that is greater than 0, we will serve the old object while we asynchronously revalidate. And that's part of the trick here. We can keep serving old stuff, and eventually we'll get the new stuff. Well, eventually is pretty fast, but still. And what soft purging does, rather than removing the object from the cache, it will just set the TTL to 0 and leverage that grace to keep serving it. Point in case, again, logging. So I think I have you mark the tag. This is your doing. So I used your Docker image, right? I spun that up. I used the standard data that's in there. And there's Augusta earrings in there. So I try to invalidate that. And I did with soft purging. So the next time I go to the Augusta earrings page to get that product, it does a hash. You remember? Receive, hash. We look it up in the cache, which is the next thing, and we have a hit. Great. But what we see is that the first field, which is the TTL, is lower than 0, minus 4.7 seconds. So you can conclude that 4.5 seconds ago, I did that soft purge. However, the grace is 259,200 seconds, which is the equivalent of 3 days. So if you sum those up, you're above 0, which is good because the next call is a hit. So I can serve that to you while I'm doing a BG fetch. BG fetch means I'm going to talk to Magento, get the new object, and put it there. And the users will be none the wiser. They won't see it. I mean, this is fast. This will happen in milliseconds. So this is a really soft landing to deal with soft purging. Last one I have is dynamic DNS. So what you may know or may not know is that DNS resolution within Varnish happens at compile time. So when you start Varnish, the VCL gets compiled, sees the host name, resolves it to an IP address, and that's the IP address you're going to have to live with as long as that VCL runs. Any changes in the VCL, not sure what's going to happen, right? So what we're trying to do, and again, we're in a process of redefining how we can contribute that, or if it remains within the commercial version. So we are listening, and we do want to provide something that is readily accessible for a lot of people. And this is one thing that is really missing in open source. So what we've done here is created a couple of modules, Active DNS and UDO, to tackle that. So let me take you to the important parts. You can configure now how DNS resolution happens. Do we listen to the DNS TTL that comes with the record? Do we override it, which I'm doing here with force? And if we do the resolution of the DNS, how long do we cache it? Do you want to resolve it every single time? I decided against that and said, you know what? 5 seconds of DNS caching is what we're going to do. And whatever IP address comes out of it, I will parse into the backend template and the probe template, which you see at the top right. Backend host 0000, we'll parse that value in, SSL is on, we have the health check, good to go. Now, what we then do is define a director. A director is also a primitive that lives in open source. We have 2 minutes, right? I'll take that into account. So 2 minutes until the story ends, ladies and gentlemen. So what a director is collecting multiple backends and exposing them as a single backend using sort of an algorithm, which in this case is random. But my source, my input, isn't individual backends. It's very dynamic. Whatever DNS came out of that magento.example.com is what I'm going to use. And if it emits multiple IP addresses, we'll load balance through it. So that allows you to have multiple instances of Magento. And you can choose between random, between hash, between fallback, and even further, every time a backend needs to be called, we'll recompute it. And if something goes wrong, we can try again and take another node. So this is a very safe way of doing dynamic backends and DNS-based load balancing. And the kicker is, and this is the last part, is we even support SRV records, which is a fun DNS type. So typically you know your A record, which you see at the top, which will emit 2 IP addresses maybe, which will balance over. But with the SRV, it has a specific service description name. We will get not only the host names, we will also get the port numbers, and we will get the priority. So in this case, Magento 1 and Magento 2 will be used because they have priority 1, and they will have random distribution. If those two would fail, there's still a Magento 3 to take over, and all of that is configured in DNS. Kind of fun. And you can use that in a Kubernetes setup, where every Kubernetes service has an internal DNS name and even an SRV equivalent, which is kind of nice. So, all of those features that I talked about, we will provide, or we can provide, an optimized VCL. A VCL that looks like the open source contributed one with all the Magento specific things, but with all these advanced features in it. And I'm done, right? We're at 11:30, so I'm going to give you a brief look at the future. We recognize that VCL is hard, and we are looking at low-code, no-code, and your-code contributions. Where low-code means making VCL better, so I'm counting on Adobe to guide us through that pull request process. No-code meaning that we would provide eventually a user interface where you can do next, finish, and we could orchestrate that into your Magento system. Or your code, and that's the exciting part. We're building a sort of a WebAssembly-based runtime where you can run WebAssembly workloads, where you can run Rust code, or even JavaScript code to customize the behavior of the cache and even do more personalized caching by talking to Redis or whatever mechanism you use. So that's on the horizon for us. That's what we're planning to do. And if you're interested, just come have a chat with us. Thank you for spending this half an hour with me. I won't do Q&A now because we don't have time for it, but I have a better one. I'll hang around near the booth, and every personal question you have that you don't want to share in the group, I'll be able to answer, or try to answer that. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. It was an absolute pleasure. I still owe you a book, which is there. Grab it if you want it. And I will see you next time. Thank you.